Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls is the name given to a collection of ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek manuscripts and fragments of manuscripts found in a number of caves in a barren foothills of the Judean wilderness, west of the Dead Sea. These documents represent the most important and most sensational archaeological discovery of our age. More than one-third of these are books of the Old Testament, which are older by at least 1,000 years than the hitherto earliest known Old Testament manuscripts. Thousands of learned articles and scores of books have been written about them, yet many of them have not yet been studied and translated. The discovery of the scrolls began in the spring of 1947 when an Arab shepherd boy missed one of his goats. While searching for it in one of the steep valleys, he threw a stone into a hillside cave and heard what sounded to him like the breaking of pottery. Summoning his assistant, the two entered the cave and found some pottery jars 25 to 29 inches, high and about 10 inches wide. In these, they found objects which looked much like miniature mummies, but were actually leather scroll wrapped in squares of linen cloth and covered over with a pitch-like substance, possibly derived from the Dead Sea. With a vague idea that they had discovered Antiquus, which might bring them money, they divided the scrolls and set off for Bethlehem, where they located an antique dealer and offered him the scrolls for 20 pounds. He refused them. Afterward, they were directed to Jerusalem where, after bargaining for weeks, they sold 4 of the scrolls to Archbishop Athanasius Samuel of St. Mark's Syrian Orthodox Monastery, and 3 to E.L. Sukenik, professor of archaeology at the Hebrew University, Jerusalem. Archbishop Samuel showed his scrolls to several authorities, who were uncertain about their content and value. Finally, they were taken to Dr. John C. Trevor, acting director of the American Schools of Oriental Research, Jerusalem, who photographed and studied some of them, then sent copies to Dr. W. F. Albright of Johns Hopkins University. This well-known authority tentatively dated them to be about 100 BC and declared them an amazing discovery. The Arab shepherds revealed the cave where the scrolls had been found, but war between the Arabs and Jews made scientific investigation impossible until February of 1949, when Dr. Lochester Harding of the Jordan Department of Antiquities and Pere R. DeVoe of the Dominican Bible School of Jerusalem carefully excavated its floor level. Within 3 weeks, they found some 800 scroll fragments belonging to about 75 different leather scrolls, a few fragments of papyrus scrolls, portions of linen in which scrolls had been wrapped, Roman lamps and portion of jars and potsherds from about 50 different jars. Apparently some 200 scrolls had been hidden away in the cave. Origen, an Alexandrian church father who lived during the 3rd century, is said to have used certain manuscripts which he found in a jar near Jericho. Also, Timotheus, patriarch of Baghdad, wrote a letter to Sergius, archbishop of Elam, about AD 800, saying that a certain person from Jerusalem told him of an Arab hunter's dog that went into a cave entrance near Jericho. When the animal did not return for some time, his master went in after him and found himself in a little house in the rock in which were many manuscripts. He reported the find to some Jewish scholars in Jerusalem who came down to the cave and removed many of the scrolls, which they said were books of the Old Testament and other Hebrew works. While excavating the cave, Harding and DeVoe noticed, on a nearby whitish terrace, a ruin which the Arabs called Khirbet Qumran. Surmising a connection between the scrolls and the ruin, they returned in 1951 and began to excavate. During the 5 campaigns which followed, they uncovered the ruins of an elaborate central building complex, the main floor of which comprised more than 15,000 square feet. It was a community center or monastery with a massive tower for defense, an extensive culinary department, a great assembly and dining hall, pantry, laundry, storerooms, spacious courts, and an impressive water system which brought water from a waterfall in the western hills, through some stone-carved channels into many large cisterns. Nearby were stables for horses, a community pottery workshop, extensive pools for bathing and baptizing, and 3 cemeteries, one of which contained more than 1,000 graves. What impressed the excavators most was a scriptorium, or writing room, 43 by 13 feet. In this were the ruins of a narrow masonry table 16.5 feet long, and 2 shorter tables together with a long bench attached to the wall. In the fallen debris of this room were 3 inkwells, 2 of terracotta and the other of bronze. One of the inkwells actually contained the residue of dried ink, which had been made from carbon, lampblack, and gum. Nearby was a double basin, which was probably used for ritual washing before and after working with the sacred manuscripts. The many discoveries at Qumran, including more than 700 coins, which provided almost continuous sequence for more than 200 years, made possible the reconstruction of the way of life of this semi-monastic Jewish community which lived there from about 110 BC to A.D. 68. The scriptorium, the pottery plants, a jar identical with those found in one cave, the many scroll fragments, the style of writing, and the way of life not only linked these people with the scrolls found in the nearby cave, but identified them as the people of the scrolls, or the Essenes. These were the people whom Josephus, Philo, and Pliny the Elder had described as having split off from the Orthodox Judaism of Jerusalem and removed themselves from the evils and wrongs that surge up in cities to live in agricultural colonies. In this very section of the country, and as far south as En-Gedi, according to their writings, they considered themselves to be called upon to go into the desert to prepare there the way of the Lord. According as it is written, "In the desert prepare ye the way, make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God." Their manner was quiet, and their lives extremely simple and chaste. They prayed each morning with the rising of the sun, worked until the 5th hour, then bathed in cold water, clothed themselves in white garments, and ate a communal meal preceded and followed by grace, then changing into their working clothes. They labored or plied their arts, including the writing of manuscripts until evening, and returned to supper in the same manner. During the evening hours they devoted themselves to prayer and the study of their laws, principally the books of the Old Testament and the Apocrypha. Life in the Qumran community was interrupted by an earthquake, which Josephus said shook Judea in the spring of 31 BC. After that calamity, the site remained uninhabited for almost 30 years. Then, about 4 BC, the community returned. The buildings were repaired, the tower was reinforced, shaken walls were buttressed, new rooms were erected, and industrial kilns were constructed. Thereafter, the secluded life of prayer and study at Qumran was resumed on a larger scale. Their faith and their purpose and mission in life must have received a great uplift, and even a small measure of confirmation, from the preaching of John the Baptist and the coming of Jesus Christ. They had taught repentance as a necessary prerequisite to baptism, as did John. Their manual of discipline had said, "They shall not depart from any counsel of the law, until there shall come a prophet and the Messiah of Aaron and Israel." Their constant teaching was that the age of consummation was at hand, that God was about to act, and the Messiah was about to appear, bringing a sword. Yet we do not know how many Essenes may have gone with John, and subsequently with Jesus. Neither John or Jesus, of course, carried a sword. The Essenes considered salvation to be only for members of their own sect, who were God's elect, and they were governed rank upon rank, culminating in a genuine hierarchy. Therefore, the community as such did not become Christian. It continued its disciplined routine, and came to an abrupt end in AD 68, when Qumran was demolished and burnt by contingents of the Roman 10th Legion, who came into Palestine to lay siege to Jerusalem and crush the first Jewish revolt. On the eve of this onslaught, the members of the community fled, leaving the most of their precious manuscripts hidden in caves around the settlement. A squad of Roman soldiers encamped on the leveled debris, divided the larger ruined rooms into living quarters, and built a rough aqueduct in the place of the elaborate water system. After a time, the Roman soldiers left, and the place remained empty until the Second Jewish Revolt. In AD 132-135, when the ruins were temporarily used as a stronghold or a hiding place. Later, the desert took possession of the area, until the Arab shepherd found the first scrolls, an archaeologist rescued the literary treasures. 37 caves in the Qumran were examined during 1952 and found to contain pottery, but 11 of them also contained manuscript material. Cave 2 yielded biblical and apocryphal fragments, among them a portion of the Book of Jubilees. and an Aramaic document describing the New Jerusalem. In Cave the Third were 274 portions of manuscripts, and 2 copper scroll which originally were made up of 3 strips of copper, riveted together and measuring nearly 8 feet in length. But in Cave Afu were found over 400 manuscripts, and about 100,000 fragments, varying in size from a thumbnail to a sheet of legal-size paper. Altogether, the remains of more than 500 different manuscripts, or large portions of manuscripts, and multiplied thousands of fragments were found in these 11 caves. About 1/3 of the manuscripts are books of the Old Testament. The remainder are commentaries on some Old Testament books, apocryphal and wisdom books, hymns and psalms, liturgies, theological works, and works relating to the people who lived at Qumran and wrote the scrolls. There are manuscripts or fragments of every book of the Old Testament, except Esther. The most popular books, to judge from the number of copies found of each, were Isaiah, the Psalms, Deuteronomy, and Genesis. These were written on rolls of leather, which had been carefully ruled to guide the scribes. A few were written on papyrus and one on copper. The most important and best preserved of all these manuscripts were found by the young shepherds in Cave. The 4 which were purchased by St. Mark's Monastery were 1. The Scroll of Isaiah, known as St. Mark's Isaiah Scroll, written on 17 sheets of parchment sewn together end to end, making a scroll 24 feet long and 10.2 inches high. It is the largest and best preserved of all the scrolls, and was written in an early form of the square letter, which, according to Dr. Albright, places it in the 2nd century B.C. This makes it the oldest known complete Hebrew manuscript of any biblical book, and it agrees in almost every respect with our traditional Hebrew texts, as used in the translation to the King James Version. 2. The Manual of Discipline, written on 5 sheets of cream-colored leather sewn together, and forming a scroll 6 feet in length and 9.12 inches in height. It not only contains detailed regulations relating to all procedures and ceremonies of the sect, but describes at some length the 2 ways of good and evil, of light and darkness, which God sets before man. 3. The Habakkuk Commentary, written on 2 sheets of brown leather sewn together, making a scroll 5 feet long and less than 6 inches high. It is a Hebrew text of the book of Habakkuk, the first 2 chapters of which are supplied with a commentary. It speaks of the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. And in commenting on Habakkuk 1:13 it says, "Into the hand of his elect God will deliver the judgment of all the nations." 4. The Genesis Apocryphon, a leather scroll about 9 feet long and 12 inches high. It is an Aramaic version of several chapters of the book of Genesis, with additional stories about Lamech, Enoch, Noah, and Abraham. The 3 scrolls from Cave I, which were acquired by Professor E.L. Sukenik for the Hebrew University, consist of 1. A 2nd scroll of the book of Isaiah, of which the first 27 chapters are badly disintegrated, but chapters 38 through 66 are in fair condition. 2. The War of the Sons of Light with the Sons of Darkness, which contains 19 columns of writing and is 9.5 feet long and 6 inches high. It is a military manual giving directions for the conduct of a holy war between the children of light and the foes foreseen as attempting to oppress the people of God in the last age. 3. The Psalms of Thanksgiving, which were hymns composed and collected by the Essene community, their hymn book. The Israeli government, through General Yigael Yadin, purchased the 4 St. Mark's Monastery scrolls from Archbishop Samuel for $250,000 and constructed a special room in the Hebrew University at Jerusalem, which they call the Shrine of the Book. This now holds the original 7 scrolls from Cave Y, which the Israeli government regards as the greatest historical treasures of the world. The other scrolls, with some of the original jars from Cave Y, the pottery from the Qumran excavation, and multiplied thousands of scroll fragments, are kept in the Palestine Archaeological Museum at Jerusalem. Here, an international group of scholars clean and restore the pottery, and piece together and translate manuscripts and fragments, as well as other objects found during the excavations in the caves and at Qumran. Discoveries in the Wadi Murabba'at area. In 1952, the Arabs of the Ta'amira tribe reported productive caves in the Wadi Murabba'at area 11 miles south of Qumran and 2 miles west of the Dead Sea. The excavations that followed Jan 21 through March 3, 1952, revealed that these 4 caves, carved 150 feet deep in the north face of the cliffside, had been used by refugees and guerrilla bands long before David and his men camped in these, or similar caverns while fleeing from Saul 3,000 years ago. In 2 of the caves, the excavators found considerable written material, among which was a parchment tablet containing a list of names and numbers, written in the Hebrew script of the 7th or 8th century BC. Fragments of 4 leather scrolls, 1 of Genesis, 2 of Exodus, and 1 of Deuteronomy, a magnificent scroll of the Minor Prophets, and some letters and contracts in Hebrew belonging to the period when the caves were occupied by an outpost of the army of Bar Kokhba, leader of the Second Jewish Revolt against Rome in AD 132-35. 2 of these letters were signed by Bar Kokhba, the Prince of Israel, and others were written to him. In 1959, Dr. Yigael Yadin organized an archaeological expedition which rode in helicopters and searched the Israeli territory farther south along the west shores of the Dead Sea. They located and explored over caves used by contingents of Bar Kokhba's army. Coins and written documents were found, including 1 scroll fragment inscribed with Exodus 31:16 and another containing parts of 7 lines of the 15th Psalms. Discoveries at Khirbet Murd. In 1950, members of the Ta'amire Bedouin tribe found manuscript material of great interest at Khirbet Murd, a ruined Christian monastery on top of a conical peak, 212 miles northwest of Marsaba. A Belgian expedition made further searches there in February and March of 1953. Altogether, these discoveries include papyrus fragments of private letters in Arabic, a fragment of the Andromache of Euripides, and a number of biblical texts in Greek and Syriac. The Greek texts include fragments from Mark, John, and Acts. Those in Syriac include fragments of Joshua, Luke, John, Acts, and Colossians. They all date from the 7th and 8th century of our Christian era. Thank you for watching. Comment and subscribe for more relevant biblical information. God bless.